This video is going to be dedicated entirely to the shoulder joint. Today we're going to be talking about possible contributing factors to poor shoulder mobility and how that might impact its function. And we're going to go through drills to address them. The shoulder joint is a common area of tightness and dysfunction, not only in the athletic population, but also in the general public. It usually happens as a result of poor postures from our day-to-day life or our lifestyles, spending way too much time in these flexed, internally rotated position, and not nearly enough time in the opposite position, spending diligent time in opening up our shoulders and putting ourselves in the positions that we might need when we're working out. Now, that alone is not necessarily a risk factor for shoulder issues, but most of the issues arise when you lack the prerequisite mobility and dynamic stability at the shoulder joint, and you're trying to put yourself in those positions that you're not necessarily ready for. And then you start adding load, you start adding reps, and then it's just a downward spiral of issues. So when it comes to the shoulder joint, anytime I say shoulder joint, I'm referring to the glenohumeral joint, and that's basically the articulation of the humerus with the glenoid fossa of the shoulder blade or the scapula. The first thing we're going to look at is the shoulder capsule. And while this is not necessarily one of the main causes of loss of shoulder overhead motion, it does happen, especially on older people or people after surgeries that they experience a lot of capsular tightness. However, we do see that a lot of people unknowingly start getting into really deep stretches that target the capsule without knowing, and that basically leads to an already loose joint becoming even looser. So it's not something that people know that they're doing again, but it's the first thing that when someone comes to me and I ask them, hey, what are some of the exercises that you're doing to improve your overhead motions, and they show me these very aggressive exercises, those are the first things that I usually recommend that they stop doing. And it adds up in the end, decreases their pain because they're now going to those end ranges of motion that are stressing the capsule and are really stressing the shoulder tissues that they don't necessarily need to do. And then the second thing that we're gonna look at is soft tissue. This one, again, is a lot more common. We have muscles that go from the shoulder blade and attach into the humerus, like your teres minor, your subscap, and your lat, that act conjunctively to internally rotate the arm and to flex it. So by releasing that either with passive stretches or myofascial release techniques with lacrosse balls, we can essentially relax those muscles and allow for a smoother overhead motion. All right, the next thing we're gonna look at is the role of the scapula or the shoulder blade. And now this is where the bread and butter is gonna be and what I wanna focus the most on, because it is commonly neglected, especially because it's on the back of your shoulder and it's not something that you are physically seeing when you do overhead motions. Now, when it comes to overhead motions, the humerus and the shoulder blade work in a 2-to-1 relationship. So for every 2 degrees of humeral abduction, there's 1 degree of scapular upward rotation, and they need to be working at that ratio all the time in order for the shoulder to be working properly. Because think about it, if you're trying to bring your arm all the way up, this fossa right here needs to tilt in conjunction with the humerus in order for you to be able to bring your arm all the way up here. So they both need to tilt at the same time. What happens is that there's 3 main muscles that work to tilt the shoulder blade upwards. The first one is your upper traps. The second one is your rhomboids and lower traps. And the third one is your serratus anterior. The main problem we see in a lot of athletes is an overactive upper trapezius and a really underactive low trap and an underworked serratus anterior, because not a lot of people even know this muscle exists, but it's there, and its role in scapular movement is really important. This is important not only for optimal movement of the shoulder blade and ultimately the achievement of a proper overhead position, but also for stability purposes. Your shoulder blade is essentially the base. You lack the ability to, 1, perform coordinated motions, and 2, stabilize in those positions. They're gonna end up putting your shoulder in compromised positions. The third part we're gonna be discussing is the thoracic spine. In order for the shoulder blade to rotate up and down, it needs to be able to glide along the thoracic spine. People who lack thoracic extension are not gonna be able to glide their shoulder blades in a smooth motion. And finally, we're going to be talking about having adequate lumbopelvic control during overhead motions. It's not something that leads to lack of overhead range of motion, but it's more so a compensation. that hyperextend their lower backs and lack their ability to position their pelvis and control their lower spine when they're doing overhead motions, but it's usually to compensate for the lack of motion up top. Be mindful of the position that your lower spine is in so that you're not cheating yourself and you're not thinking that you have a range of motion that you don't have. For this one, what you're gonna do, you're gonna grab your lacrosse ball and put it right here under the armpit crease, right there. You're gonna lay on it. You're gonna keep it there. Put as much pressure as you can tolerate. And then you're gonna bring your arm up and back down several times. Do maybe 10 times, 10 to 15 times total. And then you can also go in, provide some stretch with your other hand, and back out. All right. For this one, we really want to make sure that we're depressing our shoulder blades as much as possible to inhibit the upper traps from taking over in the movement. So what you want to do, you're going to lay face down, depress your shoulder blades and keep them nice and down and tight. And then you're going to slowly bring your arms over your head while keeping your shoulder blades engaged and down. And you're going to hold that 5 seconds and going to come back down. So for the windmill, a lot of people do it in standing, but what I like about doing the windmill in a half kneeling position is that it locks your pelvis and your hip in place so that you can focus on truly making sure that the motion is coming from your upper body and your arms. So what you're gonna do, you're gonna press the kettlebell up. I want you to be conscious of pushing up towards the sky, not just like letting the weight drop into you. You wanna push into the kettlebell. You're gonna drop your arm. This is the first variation. Drop the arm on the floor. Pull yourself up from that top arm. Once you can master that, you can start trying to get on the ground lower and up, making sure that your arm is internally rotating at the bottom, and then you're leading up. You're leading with the top arm when you're coming back up. When you can master that, you can even take it to standing. Do a standing windmill. What I'm gonna go through is a push-up. And while the push-up's reputation's been kind of damaged over the last few years, because I think a lot of people think it's too basic of an exercise, people started getting away from it and ignoring it and not doing it. But it's actually a great exercise, especially to improve your serratus activity. The first variation we're gonna do is gonna be a plank on our forearms with serratus focus. We're gonna drop on our elbows, and you're gonna let your shoulders come really, really close to your ears, and then you're gonna push the ground away from you and try to round your upper back as much as possible. You're gonna drop down, let your shoulders come to your ears, and then push the ground away from you. And the second variation is a push-up with your feet on an incline or your feet elevated. This one's a really ghetto one, but I'm being lazy and I don't want to bring a box outside, so this will do for now. You're gonna start here, come all the way down, and then push the ground away from you. This one's one of my personal favorites. It's not your traditional expanded external rotation. We're gonna do it in kneeling so that we can integrate the role of the lumbopelvic area into your overhead motion. So we're gonna start here. Shoulder protracted. We're gonna bring it in like a face pull. Externally rotate, squeeze our butt. Make sure that we're not hyperextending our spine. Internally rotate and back in. Protract fully. Face pull. Externally rotate, hold. Internally rotate and back in. Okay, this one is a segmental thoracic extension drill. So you're gonna have to take it really slow, as opposed to when people just do this one like that without being mindful. I want you to take this one really slow and think about your back, your spine, as if you're trying to flatten up a piece of pizza dough, like really slowly, little by little. So you're gonna start on the mid back. From there, what you're gonna do, you're gonna extend, reach back all the way, and then you're gonna come in, let your air out, and flex all the way in. And you're gonna go up just one segment. So imagine you're going vertebra by vertebra. You're gonna reach out and in. You're gonna reach another segment. So what we're gonna do is I want you to try to keep your lower back on the ground and your pelvis as neutral as possible. You're gonna bring your hips up, you're gonna squeeze the foam roller, then you're gonna bring your arms up. You're gonna try to keep that same pelvic position throughout the entire movement. You're gonna go up and down.